But during COVID, yeah, we were an island.
Yeah, we definitely were.
Everything went online. Everything went to media. It went during COVID. We stopped seeing each other. We stopped seeing art face to face. Everything went to Instagram. And we really missed the connection of actually speaking, one-to-one, one-on-one with people and looking at actual art. So the concept was to basically learn from each other's art practices, try to respond to each other and learn as we go, so that we weren't necessarily putting our own stamp on something, but taking what we were given and sort of responding to it maybe in a new way.
Somebody once said to me during this whole thing, they said, well, don't you get upset when somebody erases your marks? I said, no, I mean, that's the whole point, right? And nobody ever, we'd even tell people, oh, get rid of that, because that's not working anymore, get rid of it.
So Jen, I want to ask you about this concept of resolution and resolving the work during a pandemic where very little resolution is available.
One thing is this is controllable. When it comes to me, it's in my hands at that point. So it's controllable to resolve this piece, whereas all what's happening on the outside is completely out of our hands. And the whole way that the title kind of came into place is, as Barb was talking about, passing along the pieces to each of us. It went out of our hands onto the next person, out of our hands onto the next person. And then each of us got something in the end to resolve. And then part of that too is in what Wanda was saying about how, we had to kind of let go of any of the marks that we made. And I think for sure that was a thing that had to happen, but also the point was to honor the piece, because the piece becomes its own thing, because none of these pieces look like what they started.
Letting go of control is a huge part of this process. Basically, it was letting go of your ego. It's not about my style, it's about this piece. As we started layering up, some elements got stronger and stronger. And so that was part of the magic, handing it off. What's gonna happen next? Yeah. I also learned as much receiving the next step and having to react to marks and colors that were not intrinsically natural to me. That was a huge learning.
I got this big shape on, and I went, oh my, and I was terrified. I thought, oh, I can't screw this up. I'm going to screw this up. I know I'm going to screw this up.
Remember that stencil I made that took hours?
Yes, and that pink.
And the pink, and I brushed, it's very close. So whatever they did led to whatever we end up with. So really,
which is
there.
really like your own process, no matter what your style is.
It's interesting listening to you kind of speak about this, because and thinking about the project as a whole, because you started by talking about what will reconnect us? What's going to bring us together in this space where we're far apart? But then you talk about obliterating and destroying each other's work. And I think those are probably stronger terms, or maybe it's quite emotional. It's what it felt like at first. And I'm sure it got easier as the process went on, because you realize that it's not personal. But so you've got something pulling you together, and then you have these words or these terms that kind of push you back apart again. And I'm wondering, Jen, if you felt like any part of this process where you felt like you really had to honor the other artists that you were working with, or if it truly was only about the piece itself, because that's been an interesting perspective switch, because I imagine normally the artwork is about you, what's coming out of you and how it works, and it's not just about the canvas or whatever materials you're working with. It's you and that relationship. It's very intimate. But here, things are switched. There's the piece is doing something to you.
Yeah. When we're talking about obliterating and all that, we really didn't have any conflicts.
No,
that
none.
much.
No, in fact, we would laugh. Like
Yeah.
we'd get together to have our switching parties.
Yeah.
So we had these little events where when we finished a certain stage, we'd all meet and we'd have a glass of wine, or we'd probably meet in the studio. And we did videos, and each person talked about the stage. But most of the time, we would just go, "Oh my God, you did that!"
So as we're working the layers, we're actually, developing relationship to it even before it comes to us. Because
Right.
of those swap parties were great for that. You mentioned something about COVID and creativity, and if anything, I think COVID celebrated creativity because it was a refuge and it was a balm. And even though the world was totally upside down, to be able to go into the studio and spend some 3-4 hours in your little world, unconcerned because you're so taken by what you're doing, was to me was a big plus. And then what saved us at the beginning of the pandemic, it was creativity. We were watching dance, we were listening to music, watching movies. It's all this art forms is what sustained us as a population.
Art makes us feel safe. It's what emotionally connects us to one another. And that's the beautiful thing about things like poetry. As soon as you read the words that describe a feeling that you've had, it's that recognition that you are no longer alone.
True.
And so I love that concept also with your art, because you were never alone in this process. The difficulties and the pleasures, they've all been a shared experience individually and collectively.
Yeah, step one. My favorite step.
Well, step one is still yourselves, right?
That was step 2 for me. And also just sitting with the piece before so I could feel it, right? I could feel the basic colors, the shapes, potential, whatever, and then just jumping in and knowing again that somebody else is going to come after me and maybe obliterate all this. Even my darlings. I mean, they killed my darlings, there they were on the canvas. Bang, gone.
And also you're making mistakes because, art is just getting it wrong until you get it right? So all of these are like mistakes. So you have to be vulnerable and say, I'm putting this down. It may not be right. So someone else is going to come and fix it. It's a team, and you don't want to let your team down. And I think that's what we're all feeling.
Yeah,
We're feeling
yeah,
the weight of,
yeah.
don't let the team down. This
Yeah.
is the final
Yeah.
round or the
Yeah.
final,
Yeah.
end of the game.
Yeah.
So,
That's
yeah.
well said.
Yeah.
That's
for
really
sure.
interesting that the game with no goal suddenly has a goal.
Yeah.
And then you feel the weightiness of it, but you're also feeling the responsibility to each other. Even though layers 1 through 3, you had no responsibility except to the piece itself. And even
That's
in the
right.
end,
That's
the
right.
responsibility
Yeah.
is to the piece itself.
Yeah.
Right.
I saw like collective nodding was step 4, the most difficult for
Yes,
everybody.
absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that what's wonderful about this is different actually than any other exhibition that we've been in, is that we're letting people in on that process. And not only are they going to respond to the final piece, but how we did it, how we came to that piece. So I think it's a whole different experience.
By revealing process and the steps, I'm hoping that it educates the public on how tricky abstract art is, and the simpler it looks, the harder it was.
Because you've talked about vulnerability quite a bit. And so Jen, I'm gonna ask you directly, like, do you feel like this process made you braver in different ways?
I would say it did make me braver. It made me let go of what I feel precious if it's not working on the piece. So even in my own, if I'm just working on my own stuff and I'm like, I really love that mark, but it's just not working on this piece, and I just have to get rid of it. The thing is like our feelings get hurt easily when somebody thinks differently than we do. And I think now I just have to look at it from the perspective that it's not intentional. Like this person said this or did this, and it kind of hurt me, but they weren't intending to do that. Like, you just have to kind of let that kind of stuff go.
Seeing it here, There is no way that you could put this on social media in a way that I would understand
Right.
in the way that I'm feeling it right now. It's just simply not possible. Your caption would be too long. I would have lost interest, right?
That's right.
I would have been attracted to the colors and the shapes. I would have been attracted to the project because I already know you. But it doesn't give social media doesn't give anything else.
So the body in the space
Yeah.
with the painting is a whole thing unto itself that you can't, there's nowhere on social media that I've experienced that.
Right.
This was anti-social media in the sense that it absolutely slowed the process down.
Right.
Really slowed it down.
It's been such a special time. And personally too, just getting to know these three in different ways, you know, like we all know each other, but, you know, and just, you know, sometimes communicating and learning how to communicate within this group. Just so very grateful to have this project happen organically at the time that it did.
Yeah.
And it really helped me sort of come to grips with just making my own work, because I always had the swap party to look forward to and the next piece, which was always inspiring.
Say it any better.
The sum is greater than the parts.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah, and you know, I think for me, it's just the joy, the level of joy just grew over time.
Yeah.
And you'll notice that pink made its way into so many paintings. And I think that just reflects, you know, what we've gotten out of this as a group.
Well, we could all use a little more pink in the world.